Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Rancher Online Meetup. We're going to be talking about Windows containers today. This is Shannon Williams from Rancher, and we've got my co-founder, Darren Shepard, with me here today. Darren, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone.
All right. Darren is in Arizona today. I'm in California, and it looks like we have a ton of people on the meetup already. So hopefully you can all see my slides and I'm presenting and recording and everything's working well today. I figure I think this is like our 20th meetup. So thank you to everyone who's been coming to these and sending us ideas for them. We love talking to you either in Twitter or in the new Rancher Slack channel, which a lot of you have already found. We haven't even talked about it yet, but thanks a lot for all the support. So today's topic is on Windows containers, and we're joined by two of our colleagues to talk about Windows containers. So Shen Liang is also a co-founder here at Rancher. He's our CEO. And Shen, do you want to say hello?
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Shen is in California, and James Oliver is our lead on tools and automation, and has been leading a lot of the work on Windows here, along with Sheng and some of the workers. James, you want to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
James is in Phoenix. So we've got 4 Rancher people on the call this month. So it's a Rancher heavy meetup. But we are going to be diving into this stuff pretty quickly. Before we get started, though, as always, just wanted to kind of answer some of the standard questions that get asked, and also just give you a little bit of an update on the agenda. Most importantly, this is a meetup. It's not a webinar. I say this every month, but I feel like it's really important because it's not. This is meant to be a technical discussion. It's not meant to be a marketing discussion. We want to show you things. We want to demo. We want to answer technical questions. Anyone who's attended these before knows that this is not a webinar, because we tend to get really deep into technology. We answer loads and loads of questions, and we don't leave until your questions are answered. So that is maybe the most important thing. We don't really have a firm stop and start time. I mean, we're gonna run until we get done. We usually go for more than an hour, sometimes more than 2 hours. But generally, just so you know, we're recording the session. It'll be posted to YouTube in the next day or two. If you have to leave, don't worry. It'll all be up there. You can come back and watch the end later. I get that question every time in 3 or 4 different ways. As it's a meetup, it's not something where you should feel like you're just getting talked to. Unfortunately, we do have to use, the web software, so it's a little bit hard to get everyone engaged. But there's this great feature in the GoToWebinar software where you can just ask questions, and you'll see if you haven't already, the little question tab over to the side. Fire away your questions. We will address them sometimes in talking. Sometimes we'll respond in writing and send them out to everybody. But open that little window up. It's sort of where all the conversation happens. You can answer each other's questions. Sometimes I'll put it out to the community because I might not know the answer about something, or Darren might not. So it's meant to be very collaborative. You can already see the little question mark popped up there. Obviously, the other side of this is it's a meetup. We're demoing stuff. We're demoing sometimes stuff that's not yet in the product, stuff that's still going through QA. So things break. Be patient. If we try to get everything baked nicely ahead of time, but if something's not working, you can usually tell pretty quickly, and we will be pretty quick to tell you as well. So bear with us. We'll usually either make it work or figure out a workaround or something. Thank you to all of the people. We have so many people join these meetups from literally all over the world. We use a hashtag on Twitter called Rancher Meetup to tag in our discussions with one another and to talk. So many of these people now that I've met through the meetup, I've actually met in person in places now around the world, traveling and talking at live meetups and meeting with users. And but anyways, thank you to everyone. If you're out there and this is your first meetup or you've never done it before, post a picture of yourself. Show us what you do. Hashtag it with Rancher Meetup. I'll throw it on our wall of friends, and we love to get to know everybody. Tell us what you're doing and why you care about Rancher, why you like it, or how you want it to get better. And we'll read all of these things. So it's direct feed line to us. We love chatting on Twitter. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to be diving into Windows containers very quickly. We're going to start by just talking a little bit about Windows containers, what they are, where they're at in their life cycle. Sheng's going to talk about that. He's also going to demo. We released Rancher 1.3 in January, and he's going to show you how in Rancher 1.3 we allow you to start attaching Windows nodes into environments and spinning up containers. So he's going to do a little demoing, and then James is going to talk a bit more about where this is all heading and show you some pre-release software where we start to apply orchestration and management to Windows containers. And he's going to be showing stuff that's coming out in our 1.5 release in the end of February, beginning of March, and he'll be kind of going through and show you how you might do load balancing and networking and health checks and all sorts of other kind of critical container functions against Windows containers. It's really cool. After that, Darren will talk a little bit about the latest Rancher releases. We'll just kind of give you a quick update. These things are coming pretty fast and furious right now, so a lot of new features. And certainly, if you have questions at any point, fire away. So just for anyone who isn't familiar with Rancher, Rancher Labs is a software company. We're about 55 people now around the world. We build open source software. Our two most popular projects are Rancher, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot today, and Rancher OS. Rancher is an open source software platform for managing containers, container infrastructure, container orchestration, and making it really easy for people to get started with containers. Rancher OS is a tiny, lightweight Linux distribution that anyone can spin up to launch Docker, and it really is geared to run Docker as its main purpose. So it's really just enough OS to run Docker, and it incorporates Docker directly into the OS. So it's kind of a Dockerized operating system. With Rancher, it's grown like crazy in the last few years. We just did a pullback and we looked to see how many downloads of the agents and management servers there are out there, and we realized it's more than 4.5 million downloads of Rancher's management server container now, and 15 million downloads of agents out there in the world. So thank you to everyone who's downloaded, tried, spun up a Rancher environment. It's been we were kind of blown away when we realized last time we checked we were at about a million or two downloads, and all of a sudden we're almost to 5. So we were kind of blown away with how much things have picked up in the last few months as people just keep hearing about Rancher and trying it out. The whole concept of Rancher, though, is really how to simplify and make it very easy to run containers anywhere and run them on any infrastructure. Make it very easy to then manage those applications either using native Docker orchestration or using different orchestrators like Kubernetes or Mesos. And at the end of the day, really make it very possible to do you take the latest software, bring it into your application, bring it into your environment, because everything is out there now in containers. I mean, the ability to just take and consume open source software, I don't think has ever been easier, and it's just getting easier as application blueprints and compose templates and bundles and all sorts of things are coming down the pipe, Helm templates, etc. So really exciting time to be working with containers, and we're trying to take all of that and incorporate it into Rancher. At its core, Rancher really delivers a number of major functions. And the whole idea of Rancher is that it sits on any infrastructure. You load infrastructure into environments. So environments are groups of physical or virtual machines that are have a level of isolation around them, where you deploy applications and orchestration. Each environment you can pick the type of orchestration you want to use in it. So you can have a Kubernetes environment, you could have a Docker Swarm environment, a cattle environment. And across that, Rancher manages infrastructure services. So, we implement, overlay networking and DNS and load balancing and storage services, all as drivers or over-the-top software services to really simplify how, your containers run. And then around that, we build kind of the operational tools you need so that you can connect to your RBAC and Active Directory services, so that you can plug in your registries or monitoring tools or CI processes, and on top of it we build this. We have this really amazing application catalog that users and the community have incorporated so many cool services and applications into. So that's really the whole concept of application of Rancher, is this turnkey platform to get started with containers very quickly, run applications very effectively, and just make it easy. And it's all open source. So the topic today, though, is sort of a new kind of orchestration or a new kind of cluster that's coming in, which are Windows clusters. So we're going to focus our conversation today on how to take these new Windows containers, get started with them, and sort of start using them inside of your Rancher clusters, inside of your Rancher environments. The first half of what we're going to show is already available in Rancher 1.3, and then we're going to show a little bit more that is coming in the next release. But for now, I want to kick it off by turning it over to Shen and letting him start walking through the service. Shen, I'm going to make you the presenter.
Okay.
Let me know when you receive the controls.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I can see your slides.
Awesome. So, I'm really excited that Windows containers are a reality now. At Rancher Labs, we're very focused on making the latest and greatest open source tools, container-related tools, available for the enterprise market. And Windows, so many enterprises use Windows. I think with Windows containers, container adoption will be driven to the next level. The Windows containers work in two types of operating systems today. Windows Server 2016, that was GA'd, I think around September, October last year, and Windows 10, not the initial version of Windows 10, but Windows 10 with an update that I think that also came out late last year. So with that, you can basically start containers, Docker containers on Windows. And there are two types of Windows containers. I mean, Microsoft really did a great job providing the consistent experience to actually run containers in two ways. If you guys work with Docker containers on Linux, I mean, on Linux, there are actually different ways of running containers as well. There, the typical way of Docker container that's built using essentially C groups and processes, and there's also another way, the folks at hyper.sh or folks at VMware did sort of virtual machine-based containers. So it's exactly the same on Windows. On Windows, you can run the regular Windows Server containers, or you can run the Hyper-V containers. And the only difference is when you start the containers, you actually just, when you say Docker run, you give it a different argument. I think default is obviously Windows Server containers, but Hyper-V containers essentially starts a new virtual machine to host the containers. So other than that, they're largely the same. I think Windows 10 actually, as of today, I think still only supports Hyper-V containers, but other than, in most cases, you shouldn't care. The last thing I want to explain is, it probably should have been obvious, but as of right now, the images for Windows and Linux containers are different. So it's not like, now Windows support Docker containers. You can kind of take your existing, say, Ubuntu image or Alpine image or HA proxy image, and you expect it to run on Windows servers or Windows 10. Someday it actually might be possible, but it's not possible yet. Likewise, you can't just take a Windows, say, a Windows Server container image and make it run on Linux server. So there are actually two distinct image types today, and that's a little different, if you can imagine, from virtual machines. In the virtual machine world, you can run, say, Windows VM and Linux VM both on VMware or on KVM, and you can also run Windows VM and Linux VM both on, say, on Hyper-V, right? And virtual machine hypervisor really provides that level of operating system isolation, whereas today with containers, essentially Windows containers run on Windows and Linux containers run on Linux. So that's something important to keep in mind. the state of Windows container support has really come a long way. I think what Microsoft did is working with Docker Inc. itself is to really have the production grade Docker CLI and API and Docker daemon, everything ready by Windows Server 2016, and that stuff is really solid. One thing Microsoft does really well is ensuring quality and really bring that consistent experience to to all different kinds of hardware and deployment scenarios. So I personally have never really had problems with the with the basic sort of Windows Docker container quality, and sometimes, in fact, I probably see a bit more problems with variations amongst different Linux distributions and different Docker versions on Linux. On Windows, there are just far fewer variations, and I think it goes through a lot more rigorous testing. So that the basic CLI and API, I think, as far as I can tell, work really well. Then sort of the more advanced stuff, that's coming soon. Today, if you kind of just type Docker command on Windows, you actually see all the swarm mode command line arguments already. Now, they don't all work yet, but I think they'll be working pretty soon. It's just getting there very, very quickly. So 1.3 is coming out, and I have no doubt this is just going to be dramatically better. And probably pretty soon the swarm mode will be production grade as well. And what's also very exciting is, as of the last Kubernetes release, the one that just came out before the new year, Kubernetes 1.5, they had the very initial alpha support for Windows containers. Now that is a little rough, but you can get Kubernetes working on Windows today. It'll require a bit of configuration and a bit of work, but you can certainly start to deploy at least a subset of Kubernetes capabilities on Windows, and I have no doubt that capability will continue to evolve, and it'll get better throughout the year. So in summary, I think if you have applications that kind of rely on basic Docker CLI and API, there's no reason not to jump in it on Windows today. And then these more advanced capabilities are coming down the line as well. One thing that once you start using Windows containers you gotta learn the networking model a little bit differently. Windows networking model is they're at the very basic level. They're the same as Linux, but Windows also had its own special networking support. So the default networking model for Windows containers is NAT, and that is exactly the same as the default networking model with Docker on Linux, or essentially the containers are getting created behind a local NAT gateway running on the host. So that works really well. The other model, networking model that we actually use quite extensively, is a model called transparent, and that is very special to Windows. In that network model, essentially every container is directly connected to the host network. So each container would have its own NIC essentially, and would have its own MAC address, and each container can issue DHCP requests to the DHCP server and get its own IP address. So this is very similar to how, say, virtual machines would be managed in a bridge network. Then Windows has these more advanced networking model for containers as well, L2 bridge and L2 tunnel. And frankly, these, as of today, I mean, these networking models will be used if you want to run software-defined networking, or no doubt more advanced networking scenarios. So we haven't really been able to utilize many of these more advanced networking modes. And as of today, it comes with different kinds of restrictions, like the L2 tunnel mode actually literally only work on Microsoft Azure stack. So since majority of our customers interested in Windows today tend to run Windows on on their VMware cluster, so it doesn't quite work. So far we've actually been able to go very far with the NAT and the transparent networking models, and those really work very, very well. So I want to just since we're going to be talking a lot about transparent networking with Windows, I want to kind of just highlight that and explain that a little bit more. So in this situation, we have a host network with two hosts. These hosts could be virtual machines, and they're connected to a DHCP server. So as you can imagine, this is a very typical setup for an enterprise Windows deployment, right? Either on bare metal or on a vSphere kind of deployment. This is not really the typical setup for deploying Windows servers in the cloud. In the cloud, you generally have far less control over networking, and you probably don't really get to run your own DHCP servers, and you don't really get to easily get multiple IP addresses that you can create containers and grab an IP address over DHCP. But for on-premise deployments, for vast majority of Windows deployment in the enterprise out there, I mean, this is something that people really understand. So really what's going on here is I'm creating 4 containers on 2 hosts, and these containers are essentially connected to the host network. So from a DHCP server perspective, they're basically seeing the MAC address of the containers, and the containers are essentially getting the IP address directly from the DHCP server. So for for Windows admins and for IT admins, this works really well, because in a lot of Windows, I'm going to hopefully be able to show you how this stuff actually works in my demo setup. But in a lot of the Windows shops, the DHCP server sometimes either tend to be closely tied to the Active Directory setup, and so you can very easily even add containers into your Active Directory machine database as well. So you can really have a uniform set of management infrastructure set up for your containers and virtual machines. And physical machines. So it's actually, I think a lot. I mean, no wonder Microsoft created this networking mode, and it's so flexible, so easy to use from our perspective. And the only problem is it doesn't work that well in the cloud. But with like I said, with vast majority of Windows deployments on vSphere and inside the enterprise, I think this, in my opinion, this would be the preferred approach. And the host firewall could still limit access to the containers. So essentially, it's not as if you're giving up all security. There's actually a lot you can do to program the host firewall in certain ways to protect access both to the host and to the containers running in transparent networking on the same host as well. So you can do you can effectively do network policy and security groups and that kind of stuff. So feel free to ask me if there are any questions. I mean, hopefully for someone with Windows background and basic networking background, this should be very obvious. So what we did in Rancher 1.3, which came out just before the new year, is we added the ability to create Windows environment. So I'm not sure that this Windows environment concept will even eventually persist, because over time maybe Windows and Linux will just kind of get mixed. It will make sense, for Kubernetes environment to work for both Windows and Linux. But for now, there are just enough differences between Windows and Linux, and frankly, most Windows shops, when they set up these Windows clusters, they probably, it's not on top of their mind to run mixed Windows and Linux workload anyway. So for now, having a sort of a separate cluster for Windows seemed to be exactly what our customers want. so I'm going to kind of show you how this could work in practice. So I'm going to show you my my VM. So in order to show that, I have a very simple setup here, emulate sort of a Windows enterprise VMware-based Windows setup, except I'm doing it all on my laptop with the VMware workstation. So what's happening here is on this workstation, I'm actually running 4 VMs that matter. One is my Ubuntu VM. That's used only for the only purpose of running Rancher server itself. Then I have two VM Windows Server 2016 hosts, and these hosts, host 1 and host 2, these hosts are used to basically host Docker containers. And I have a third Windows instance that I'm using to run DHCP and DNS. So I'm actually running what they call, don't get this confused with the Docker NAT mode, but I'm actually running all these VMware VMs using VMware NAT mode. So they're effectively running in a virtual network that's managed by VMware, and I disable the DHCP inside VMware. So it's my my Windows DHCP server and DNS server that's serving this network. And this is just to emulate that, in a lot of enterprise environments, you'd have an Active Directory controlled, DHCP server and DNS server. So here I just have a simple Windows DHCP and DNS server set up. So what's happening here is so I'm gonna kind of jump to the so I kind of will show you. I've shown you the setup, and I can kind of jump into one of the Windows Server hosts, and you can see on this host I've got Docker installed, and this Docker. Let me see what version it is. It is the 1.12.2 version. This is the version that actually this is the official version that I think Microsoft released with Windows Server 2016, and this is if you see the if you kind of see the commands, you already see commands like swarm and Docker service create. You can already start to do all of these things, but I don't think they all work yet. But if you test it, you'll find out what works and what doesn't work. So I'm gonna go to let me just quit. Okay, I'm gonna go to the web UI. So this is the Rancher UI. What you would do to start up a Windows environment is when you add an environment, you can literally just select Windows and you can name the environment whatever you want and you can create it. So for this demo, I'm not going to go through the whole process because I kind of created a Windows environment already, and I've actually added those 2 hosts already. And you can see even on these two hosts, I've got a couple of nodes already running. And one of the Windows hosts had 4 gig of memory, the other had 2 gig of memory, and Microsoft really did a good job, exposing shell access and exposing logs. So essentially, you get the kind of Windows experience on a system that was really designed for Linux. So a lot of Windows admins like that. I mean, we effectively just opened up this PowerShell access, right? And I can, I can create a new container. Let's just say I create a container called NanoServer. So this is Microsoft's version of a slimmed down container OS. It's very well done. I think it's only probably 200 or 300 megabytes, and they managed to support enough, core Windows services so that you can actually run .NET and all that stuff. So it's actually very useful, and it's just a great container. So I'm gonna give it give it a host name called NanoServer as well. And I noticed I selected transparent mode, so I created it, and it should take no more than just a few seconds to create. Just like in Rancher, especially if the image is already being pulled, and it'll just get created very quickly. Once the NanoServer container is created, so I'm going to kind of actually go back to the DHCP DNS system. So you can see, I'm not sure that it started yet. Yeah, so you see here it's already started. You see it actually, I'm going to just showing you this. So it actually got an IP address 192.168.204.65, and it's NanoServer lab.rancher.com. So the nice thing is, I mean, this is really basic stuff. I'm just literally just starting a container just like virtual machine. But in a lot of these Windows shops, they have set up a DHCP, DNS kind of environments. You can, a lot of these Windows shops, they can even let you automatically register the server essentially in the DNS framework. So this server, NanoServer, you can see here, and automatically an A record is actually created. So in the DNS. So effectively, I've got a very primitive form of almost like service discovery going on. I created something called NanoServer, and I can, since it registered itself in DNS, so I'm now pinning the NanoServer from another container running on a different host, and it'll work. So like I say, even cross-host networking, that's the beauty about transparent networking, right? There's really no magic going on here. Everything just works. And even with out of the box Windows DHCP and DNS functionalities, a very primitive form of service discovery even works. So next one, I'm going to create a container called IIS. That is the Windows. That's a much bigger container actually. NanoServer is 300 megabytes, but Internet Information Service, Microsoft's web server, that runs on the more full-scale Windows core, and that takes it's a container with probably 5 or 6 gigabytes. So it takes a while to actually initially download. And in this case, it shouldn't take that long because I actually created that before, so it's actually already started. So the IIS container is already started. So if I go to this site, you can see IIS is right there already up and running. So it is. I mean, this type of experience is actually not something a Windows admin has access before. So I've shown this to some of the Windows people. They're actually very excited to see this because it works in an environment they're familiar with, and it's really easy to administrate, and and they can run commands, and they can even make API calls, and it runs all the software, .NET, and everything they're familiar with. So this is basically, everything I've shown you is basically what Rancher 1.3 supports out of the box, and it's very primitive. It's essentially no better than just a UI that let you create containers. Because, like I said, to be honest, things like Swarm and Kubernetes, we weren't quite ready to really supported in Rancher yet. And most importantly, in 1.3, this whole Rancher Compose and Cattle experience, most of it doesn't really work. I mean, you could probably, I'm sure you can upload a stack, you can upload a compose file, and it'll create the containers, but it just wouldn't really create services for you. It wouldn't create, it wouldn't let you scale the service. It wouldn't do the health check. So there's, this is it wouldn't do service discovery. So a vast majority of the Cattle capabilities just don't work. And what you have is a is a very simple way to create Windows containers and maybe using the Windows native DNS and DHCP capabilities to register them and discover them. So this is what's coming, and this is really just the beginning. Hopefully,
before you, just a couple questions have been coming in before we jump off of this and start talking about the next step. The first one came in was about registries. When you use an existing Docker registry, can you use Windows templates in the same registry? Do you have to have a separate kind of registries or something special you need to do with the templates from sort of managing them in a repo?
No, there's really no difference at all. All the demo I'm doing here, all our development is just done on the standard Docker Hub. And it accepts both types of images. They're different kind of images. So if you pull a Linux image onto Windows today, it would not run. But they're really stored in the same registry.
And there was a comment that Robert Kozak made that I thought was interesting. He sort of questioned the idea that there aren't that many mixed Linux and Windows environments, saying that in his organization today, they already have environments with Windows IIS and Redis, Elk Stack, and Elasticsearch and other components. So I'm curious, as you think about mixed environments, how far away is that? What do we think the timing is for that?
I think I would say Rancher today can already, because I think we're overloading the term environment. Rancher environment has a very specific meaning. We mean a cluster. So there's nothing wrong with using Rancher in a mixed Windows, Linux, enterprise environment if we just put, say, all the Linux instances under a Mesos cluster and put the Windows instances now on a Windows container cluster or multiple Windows container clusters. So you can still allow them to mix. It's just what we're and going forward, I'm going to explain. Going forward, I think it is definitely the goal for us and for the entire container industry to make them be able to mix more seamlessly. So you can actually already see it, the work we're doing in 1.5. This is a really great leading to what we're doing in 1.5. So what we're doing in 1.5 is one obvious gap, besides Swarm and Kubernetes, which we're going to get it to work. But we want to just kind of get it to work, get Cattle to work on Windows first. And believe it or not, and Cattle involves a few services, like there's a Cattle scheduling service, but besides that is metadata, DNS, health check, and load balancing. And in fact, the way we're going to very quickly be able to support these services, we're exactly going to do a mixed Windows and Linux environment, which is actually what Kubernetes guys are doing as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to just allow you to create a couple of Linux servers in a Windows environment. But for now, these Linux servers will just be used for the sole purpose of running these core Cattle services, and we're going to make some scheduler enhancements that that James is going to show in a few minutes to make sure that Windows containers never get scheduled on Linux hosts, because today they obviously they don't mix. And then going forward, that's 1.5, which has come out a month from now. But then in the future, what we certainly plan to add Windows Swarm support, Windows Kubernetes support, and really that mixed. The big reason why today the mixed Windows and Linux environment doesn't work that well yet is this whole networking. We haven't figured out how to make. Because Windows Swarm mode is going to come with its own overlay networking, but it's not the same, may not be exactly the same overlay networking as Linux. I mean, maybe they're the same, maybe they're not, so we kind of need to look into it. And at some point, if you really want to make mixed Windows and Linux environments to work, I think we just have to work out some of the networking issues, and then that really shouldn't be a problem. So with that, I think Shannon, we should transfer it over to James, and James can give you a preview of the sort of work he's been doing for 1.5.
Yeah, while I'm doing that, Shang, there was a question from Trond Hindenes, and he said, we'd really like to put Linux-based load balancers in front of our IIS servers. Can you do any integration between environments? What do you think might work as an option for that type
Yeah,
of
actually, James is going to show that you don't even need mixed environments because if you use your own Linux-based load balancer image, then today you just put it in a different Linux environment until we figure out how to mix those two environments. But if you use ranchers, if you kind of build it as a rancher system server, so just use the rancher load balancer based on HA proxy, then with what James is going to show you, it's going to work in 1.5. Okay, James?
You guys hear me?
Yeah, I can see your screen and we can hear you great.
All right, great. So thank you, Sheng. So as Sheng mentioned, with 1.3, we've laid down the foundation for Windows containers on Rancher. However, the cattle experience was very lacking. Many of our microservices that make cattle work, such as DNS, metadata, health checks, load balancer, none of that is usable on Windows alone, and mainly because most of our software is built for Linux. So what we've done in this, in what we consider more of a transitional stage, is we've allowed mixed environments where you can register Linux hosts as well as Windows hosts. And what we've done is we've created the ability to run our microservices on a subset of the hosts, namely the Linux machines, but still use them in the Windows environment, in the Windows machines as well. So just a general overview of my setup. I have 4 virtual machines. 2 are running Ubuntu Linux machines. One of which is running my Rancher server and a MySQL database. The other Linux machine you'll see has been registered into this environment. And then I have 2 Windows virtual machines that have also been registered into this environment. They're running Windows Server 2016 Data Center Evaluation Edition. One is headless and one is the full thing. So just to jump into it. We've created a template for a very simple blogging platform called blogengine.net. It's very similar to WordPress. I'll just review it real quick. So yeah, it's a great little microblogging tool. Seems fairly full-featured. So why don't we just launch this? We'll set scale to 1. All right, so immediately we'll notice we have a load balancer in here. What's that about? This is probably this is our Rancher load balancer. It's built for Linux, and then we have this the database, the underlying Microsoft SQL Server database, and the actual application server. So already we have a stack that is comprised of various services that are meant for different hosts. So one of the things we've had to solve is how to schedule the containers onto the correct host. And we solved that by building this external scheduler called the Windows Scheduler, which will actually look at the image and make decisions based on what it's supposed to run on, what it's built for. So this gives us an ability to transparently and seamlessly launch heterogeneous stacks onto our environments, and we don't have to worry about special annotations of these services. It's all just done dynamically. So see, there's no special affinities required. So we'll give this a moment to stand up. You'll see we have a load balancer. This is the Rancher load balancer running on our Linux host. All of our microservices have already stood up. This would usually take some time, as well as these images are the base images these are built off of are quite large. But once you've pulled it once, you're good to go. So without further ado, we'll head over and And there it is. It's a load balanced application. So, and we can interact with this through the load balancer. Let's just make some basic state changes. Okay. And now to further showcase that the scheduler is doing its job, you might have noticed that we set a soft host label affinity constraint for the web and application server containers, so we can control where they land if we want to. So why don't we prove to ourselves that these are networked together by moving the application server onto the other virtual machine. Now what's actually happening behind the scenes is we've plumbed in our DNS and metadata into these containers. It's actually injected right into the container. You can see on the network interface we have our Linux hosts, or hosts if you have multiple Linux machines running the microservices, listed as DNS servers. Hence we can resolve all of the stacks and services in our environment. And so really, one of the major difficulty here, I mean, most of this already works. Our microservices function on Linux machines. However, certain things were meant to run on every host, such as metadata and DNS were generally communicated to over a link local IP address, which will not work in this sort of an environment. For obvious reasons. So we had to make changes in the back end and in the microservices to make it possible to limit the hosts that they run on.
Hey, James, while we're waiting for that, there was a question that came in, and it was a question about whether this type of environment, would it be possible for a window host to join a generic cattle environment? Or is the Linux host kind of a special role inside of a Windows environment? So you can only really set this up in a Windows environment, or could you actually add a Windows host generically into a cattle environment?
The user experience is not there, but there's nothing technically preventing us from registering Windows hosts into a Linux environment. However, you might end up with Linux containers being scheduled onto Windows hosts if you're not running this special scheduler. You could use host label affinities today to do so, but it wouldn't just work right out of the box.
There's another question that came in. Salvatore said, kind of again along the topic of mixed environments, is would it be possible to move a data container from one Windows-based host to a Linux-based host? For example, a data container having my MS SQL data, could you move data containers and have them run on different hosts?
Well, I mean, largely that depends on what database you're running. Like Microsoft SQL Server, I don't know if you could run that on Linux. However, we currently don't have any of our storage drivers working with Windows. So you would first need, say, like a Rancher NFS. So you could have shared storage, persistent volumes on Windows. And from there, yes, it would be possible to migrate your database or your data store from a Windows host onto a Linux host.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it looks like everything is reconciled. We have our web container running, and why don't we just hit the load balancer again. As you can see, we haven't lost state of our blog. So the last demonstration I'll perform is to validate the scheduler will not allow these containers to be scheduled onto Linux hosts to more or less prove that the scheduler is making decisions. So we'll just pause both of these hosts and delete a Windows, delete the web container. And all of the existing cattle features will eventually be available to Windows environments. All the parts you know and love. Yep. So we see, despite maybe some of the text needs to be adjusted, but scheduling has failed because no viable hosts have been found. So that concludes the demonstration I have for you guys. Does anybody else have any questions, or should we turn it over?
Yeah, there was a couple more questions that came in. I mean, one was, are there any plans to have Rancher management server be able to run in Windows containers? I assume the answer to that right now is no, but I thought I'd throw it out there.
I mean, Darren, maybe you can comment. I mean, there's no reason it can't. I'm sure it already does. It should be very easy. Darren?
The Rancher server, all it is some Go programs and Java. So there's really no reason we couldn't. I mean, even like our DNS and metadata, a lot of these services, pretty much they're all written in Go. The only one that has the hard time running on Windows is the load balancer because that's using HA proxy. But most of our stuff actually runs fine on Windows. It's more the problem we have right now is just the complexity and usability of multi-arc architecture images, like how to manage that, and so it's a lot of overhead right now for like producing, Windows and Linux versions of everything, and then how to manage it. And so this is as James was kind of saying, like technically under the hood, we can actually do quite a bit. We can do heterogeneous environments. We can do all these different things. It's really just managing all this user experience and making sure that like things kind of work the way you expect them to. And so that's just kind of the hurdles we're getting over right now with Linux and Windows.
There's another question. Deepak just asked. He said, "What's the license model for Windows for Docker? Is there some special license cost you need to pay? I mean, is it included in Windows 2016 license? Do we need do you need anything special to run this? Can you run? How would you recommend people test it out? Any comments on that?"
No, Docker comes as a Windows feature, so Microsoft will effectively support all the way up to the Docker engine, and then you run Rancher on it. I mean, of course, Rancher would support the management stack, so like Kubernetes or stuff like that. So or cattle. So Docker itself is officially supported by Microsoft.
There's another question which was more about migrating and what. Do we have any experience or discussions with users who are taking traditional .NET, written applications and containerizing them? What's that process like? What are people doing? What are they finding? What works well? What's kind of turning out to be a bad option? Any thoughts right now on just practicalities around taking something that you've written for on-premise and sort of traditional enterprise workload and moving it to a container and then running it using containers?
So there are actually lots of, we certainly know of customers and users doing exactly that. So my impression is, what attracts them is exactly the simplicity of writing Docker files. The Docker files are exactly the same as the Linux Docker files, which I'm sure everyone on this call would know. And there's really not that much to it. So I am not even that we're not even showing it here. And there's also tons of examples online for Docker files for some of the standard .NET samples, like Blog Engine. Blog Engine is just one of standard .NET samples that everyone looks at. So it wasn't very difficult for us to get it going. Yeah. So I think James is showing a Docker file right now. That's all it takes to build what he's showing you.
Yeah, anything that requires like Microsoft SQL Server, it's incredibly easy to get your schema in a container and running. Microsoft has taken it upon themselves to provide base images for a lot of the components that you would want to use, such as IIS, Microsoft SQL Server, or any other the basic components.
So Shannon, I mean, what do you think where do you think we are in the life cycle of adoption of Windows containers? I mean, it still seems like, some of the stuff is a little bit early. The networking is not really all totally there. There's the orchestration clearly is just kind of coming in to be available. Do you think that 2017, lots of people will start to migrate applications, or do you feel like this is still going to be the year of people dipping their toes in the water?
I mean, I think it's definitely still early, but there's really no reason, you can't put Windows containers in production anymore. I mean, once Microsoft, remember, even before Microsoft declared GA, I mean, they've been testing and beta testing all that stuff for probably a year. So I think the technology is definitely there. I mean, you don't have to. Everyone doesn't have to build, Kubernetes templates for Windows on day one. That will probably take another, 9 months to a year. But I think if you get Docker images going, or you get a simple Docker Compose going, or Rancher Compose, I mean, there's no reason you can't start now.
You mentioned that you've talked to a lot of users, and some are getting started right now. What is a place where you see people starting? Is it with web-facing applications? Is it with dev environments? What's the process that you see sort of organizations adopting to start using this?
No, I mean, these are generally organizations that are developing some kind of a .NET application. .NET is just very popular amongst IT organizations as an internal application development platform. So this is very natural to start with that. So that's why Microsoft did a lot of work to basically ship .NET Core with NanoServer. So these days you can basically get the entire Windows image, including the .NET runtime for under 500 meg. And then that's a great unit that you can use to deploy your homegrown .NET applications, and so that's where most people start.
Okay. And in terms of two other questions. One, do you see any applicability for this with virtual desktops or any kind of desktop level computing? Do you think there will be use cases where this gets applied in that direction?
I mean, desktop is there's app virtualization and desktop and the VDI. I mean, VDI is just a virtual machine. I don't think this applies at all. So app virtualization. I mean, today, could app virtualization in the future leverage container technology? Maybe. That seems like a good fit, but doesn't seem to be the big focus of the industry right now. Right now containers are more focused on getting the server side .NET applications running. I haven't seen people putting like Word, Excel, that kind of stuff inside containers. So with that, I think you can. I can totally see app virtualization potentially work with containers too.
And what about sort of third-party vendors? Are you are any third-party vendors that deliver kind of common server-side .NET applications? Are you running into people who are actually starting to package stuff up as containers and how they distribute it, or do you feel like that's still pretty early?
No, that's very early. Other than Microsoft is packaging up their entire stack, right, from .NET to IIS to SQL Server. All that stuff is packaged. I think just like on Linux. I mean, even on Linux. I think when Docker initially started to take off, it was just basic operating system images, and and it's basically used for organizations who do a lot of in-house development to develop to package their own applications. So that's where Windows containers are today.
Ian asked a question. He said, Microsoft has a strong relationship with Docker. Are you seeing interest from Microsoft to drive adoption of Windows orchestration? Do you think
drive.
Microsoft push the adoption of Windows orchestration into Kubernetes and Swarm and other things? I mean, what do you think Microsoft's
like I said, I think it's very clear that Windows Docker out of the box will support Swarm mode because I already see the commands in there. And Microsoft is certainly very active in the Kubernetes community as well. So I have no doubt both Swarm and Kubernetes will be well supported on Windows.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, James, for the demo. Sheng for sort of walking through all of this. If anyone has any other questions, they'll be here for a little bit, so feel free to send them over. Otherwise, I'm going to take back control, and we're going to talk a little bit about Rancher 1.3. Just a second. All right. So a couple things, just as hopefully you guys can see my screen now. So we released Rancher version 1.3 in early January. This is really the first release in the new sort of monthly release cadence that we established for 2017 and going forward, where we're going to be basically doing a code freeze every 2 weeks and then pushing a release kind of thereafter with everything that stabilizes. I think one of the things that we released in that 1.3 release was Windows environments. There's also a lot of changes to the UI, a lot of enhancements to Kubernetes environments. Darren, do you want to talk maybe just a minute about some of those Kubernetes enhancements that were done in 1.3? We could just touch on them briefly, and some of the work we've done around Helm and the new Kubernetes dashboard and the direction we're working on with those things.
Yeah, so in Kubernetes, so in Rancher 1.3, we've gone to Kubernetes 1.5. We're doing our best to keep up with Kubernetes upstream. Like if they release something, we try to get it out to Rancher users. Typically we're like the patch releases. We're like within a week we get them out. But we've stayed up to date with Kubernetes 1.4 and then 1.5. But anyway, so 1.5 is the latest that we're doing right now. But one of the bigger changes under the hood of when we switched to 1.5 is we've gone to Sky DNS. Before we were using Rancher DNS, and there was various reasons of why we started with Rancher DNS, but it mostly had to do with that we started integrating with Kubernetes around 1.0, and it was very hard to get Sky DNS up and running. There's been a lot of improvements in that area, and it's now just kind of an add-on you deploy, and a lot of the management of setting up a DNS address and everything is managed by Kubernetes now. So since Sky DNS has matured a lot more, it's much easier to deploy. We've switched over to that, and then additionally, we've included Helm and the dashboard UI. So again, when we started working with Kubernetes, there really wasn't much of a UI, so we built our own. But the community has really done a great job of building a UI around Kubernetes that has all the, you can get to all the different things, deployments and replica sets and all that. And so we bundle that in by default now. And so when you deploy a Kubernetes environment, we have kind of this add-on manager now where we have the standard add-ons that we are packaging, which is Sky DNS, Dashboard, and Helm. And so the last one there that I mentioned was Helm. Again, we had the Rancher catalog in the Kubernetes environment. Helm, they've done a lot of work to make that great for Kubernetes, and so we're bringing in Helm, and then we'll see down the line of how and it makes sense for the Kubernetes environments to integrate with our existing catalog, or if we just kind of make Helm the primary thing for Kubernetes environments.
One of the Darren, one of the things too, I know with 1.3, I think it was, we released a little bit more, and I think this is reasonably well documented in some of the best practices guys, but a little bit more of the, kind of defining data plane and management planes for Kubernetes with dedicated hosts and allowing for different types of Kubernetes architectures to be supported.
Yeah, so there's various different, so the kind of the default environment, we schedule out the etcd and the API server and those various components. There's different scheduling labels we put on those. So if you have the right labels, you can separate the workload. So you can separate like the node, like put etcd on certain things, put the API server on certain servers, and so you can separate it out a little better. So you have a better, kind of managing the failures and whatnot.
Great. The other thing that was really cool, I just noticed when we were doing this is while I was taking the screenshot for this, we passed 5,000 stars on GitHub, and I just wanted to say how thankful we are for all of you out there who participate in the community, who file bugs, who solve issues, help one another, and thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for kind of sharing the love and the stars. Those are things we do notice, and thank you so much. It's really cool to see that. Okay, next release. We have 1.4. It's going to be shipping most likely next week, I think is the current plan, right, Darren?
Yeah. I mean, so basically the approach that we're doing right now is we basically will ship on whatever date we have. As long as, if features aren't ready, then they'll just land in the next release. And so this is what we currently have lined up. So webhooks, I think we first introduced webhooks maybe in 1.3, but it wasn't really quite done. So this is what we've done in 1.4. This is really more about putting in a framework such that we can have much more webhooks. So in 1.4, what's landing is really more of the webhook framework, and it just has only one webhook right now, which is just scale up or down. But it's a very simple framework that people can add more actions to. Requires like some Go code, but we're hoping we can get some good contributions there, different ideas of what features people want. And this is, just to clarify, this is on the webhook receiving side. So this is so Rancher can be a receiver of a webhook. So the first one that we did was scale up and down a service, and kind of the use case we were going for there is, we can integrate Rancher to something like Prometheus or Sysdig or some type of monitoring system that has threshold and alert and like threshold and like action capabilities such that they can call our webhook to scale up or down a service. And so we have some demos of that working. So that's webhooks. Next, what's coming out is, again, this is just we're plumbing in the framework for network policies. The only thing that's going to be really easily available right now is to deny all traffic between stacks. So it's like isolate every stack from every other stack. So be able to get to all the Rancher metadata and all the services, get out to the internet, but just stacks in the same environment won't be able to talk to each other. That's just like one simple policy we're adding in 1.4, but it's really, there's a much larger framework under the hood of defining a complete policy that where you're able to say communication paths like from and to containers or stacks or services, what protocol or port is allowed, and then also some more complex things like selector-based network policies. And so we've gotten a lot of requests around being able to control the who can talk to what, and we're really excited to get this out. So like hopefully we'll see in like the 1.4 or 1.5, like in a month or so from now, the full UI and CLI and everything to manage the complete policies. So this next feature we have here for the API interceptor, this is just basically, when we deploy Rancher, typically like the requirements come when we go into enterprise. When we deploy, people want to be able to hook into our API server, be able to intercept the API requests, and like reject to accept them or modify them. Sometimes people actually want to, if someone puts into like sanitize the request, so they can't do things like privileged or whatever. And so we have a whole framework coming out in 1.4 for basically you can configure it to point to your endpoint. You implement the API. It's a very simple API that just posts basically the JSON request. You reply back with either if you accept it or if you want to modify it, and then it'll go through. the multi-host IP scheduler, this is kind of a very specific feature. Not a lot of people have this requirement. Basically, this is the idea of like, if I have a server that has multiple IPs on it, I want to be able to bind, like, I want Rancher to automatically choose the binding of the port. So it's like, typically what happens is like, if you say, when you deploy a container today, and you say like, I want to bind port 80, you get all IPs on the host. It's not actually just a specific IP. Well, the user could choose a specific IP, but then they have to know about the IP on the host. So what this allows us to do is somebody can set up a host that has like 8 or 10 IPs or more than that. And if they say they want public, like they want port 80 on the host, we can choose a specific IP for them. So that's like a little bit more specific feature. The reason why some users care about this is they always want to be able to expose on a service on standard ports. So like if it's a web server, it always wants to be on port 80. And if you have an abundant amount of IPs, like if you're using a private IP range, then you can just create more IPs on the host. All right, and then the last feature, this is a big one, been asked for a very long time. We're really excited. We're finally going to get it in. Rancher 1.4 will have secrets management. So it runs in 2 modes. There's one which is like our own embedded secret management storage, or it will delegate to Vault. And honestly, this is a whole topic on its own. We could do probably a whole meetup on secrets management and how we implement this. But we're going to see it come out in 1.4. We're labeling it as experimental. It should be fully functional. There's no like massive problems or feature gaps right now. But given the nature of its security and stuff like that, we want to give it a little more time to bake before we say this is kind of a GA feature.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren, for going through all that. There were a bunch of questions that came in. The two things just real quickly. We're kind of nailing down the topic for next month's meetup, but more than likely we'll be diving into secret management in some detail and probably talking about webhooks, auto scaling, and kind of how to automate CI processes more as well. So Matt, if you're interested and you've got things you'd like to discuss, or if you're interested in presenting too, we'd love to get user stories. Love to get someone who wants to share a little bit of what they're doing. Feel free to tweet at me or send me an email, or let us know, either Shannon at Rancher or info at Rancher, what you're interested in, and we'll do our best to incorporate it into the next couple meetups. I know we have some storage stuff we want to talk about pretty soon as well, so maybe that'll be next month or the month after. A couple questions that have been coming in while we were talking. One, let me see if I can just get all these open. Okay, the one was from Marcus, and Marcus was just these are. Let me ask Salvatore's question first. It's a little more to do with this. Some applications with rigid configurations need a restart after a service is scaled up/down. Will that be possible on 1.4 webhook to sort of restart containers too? Darren, do you know if that's a hook that's already in there?
No, it's not. I'm trying to think what would be the flow you'd want there. So basically, after a service has scaled up. So right now, like the webhooks, what I was saying is the webhooks right now, these are webhook receivers, not the webhook senders. So if you want to react to an event based on what's happening in Rancher, that feature is like that's not really there. I will tell you there is, if you wanted to build a very simple service to do this, there is that information available like in the metadata. I don't know if it's in the metadata, but I know it's definitely in our API. We keep like the restart counts, and there's all these other service index, create index, different numbers on the services of containers, so you can see when things are created or started, if your service needs to be restarted. Like if you wanted to build like a kind of a sidekick to do that, but right now, no, that we wouldn't have that functionality.
I mean, the idea of the webhooks, though, is that that should be a relatively simple webhook receiver that someone could build in the new framework, correct? I mean, if they had another system that would notify it restart, the containers in service A, that should be the kind of thing someone could design as a webhook receiver, correct?
Well, we would receive, I mean, so it's a receiver, so it would have to be, if someone kicked off an event and that caused a scale up, scale down, we could build it into the scale up, scale down as an option of that hook to then additionally do a restart.
But you could have another hook that would say restart if some other event was triggered, correct? Like, so you could have a restart hook in addition to a scale. So it could be two separate hooks, right? You could do one hook to scale up and then a second hook that says, scale up completed, now trigger that to go cause a restart. Or if you wanted to restart for some other reason. I just see restart being a useful hook regardless.
Yeah, so I mean, you can probably figure out. So the idea of the webhooks right now is that it's really a framework, and we just put in one very simple scale up, scale down. But we're looking for people to either contribute or at least just put in issues and say, hey, this is like the functionality I actually am looking for. Like the specific. So this would be one. It's like, okay, when a service scales up or down, I want to be able to restart the containers. So that would be something we could put into a future release.
There's another question. Trondheim, he said, we're finding it hard to auto-upgrade a service to a specific version, to version latest using the API as part of their CI/CD process. Is there anything happening in terms of CLI, API tooling for Rancher that you would recommend for that kind of a use case?
Well, for that use case, basically what users typically do is you create a compose file and put latest in there. And then there's a label you can put on the service to say always pull the image before you start. And so that will mean basically every time always pull the image before you deploy. So then what you would have to do is you do a force upgrade to the same version. So like from Rancher Compose, if you're using Rancher Compose or Rancher CLI, there's a -- force upgrade. So you would do like Rancher Compose up force upgrade -C for confirm the upgrade at the end. And basically it would just redeploy the exact same stack, which means it would roll out all the new containers. But since the container is labeled as saying always do a pull, it will effectively delete the container, pull latest, and then start the container again.
So I think he said that might work great. So thank you. Jason asked if there were any advantages or disadvantages to using the native Rancher Secret Store versus Vault. That's probably a longer question we're going to dive into in the next meetup and when we sort of roll that out. But at a high level, I think the concept is the native Secret Store is meant for sort of if you're just running everything inside Rancher and you want to keep it simple and you want to just roll it out, that's great. If you're using Vault already and using it for lots of other things, that's great. Use that. Conceptually, it's pretty similar, I think, right there.
Yeah. To be honest, we're using Vault in almost like a I totally forgot what the term is for key encryption. Anyways, like a hardware key-based encryptor. HSM, that's what it is. Sorry, we're almost using it like in a scenario very similar to an HSM. So basically, we're using Vault to manage the secrets encryption, and so the Vault just basically allows you to apply a lot more policies and interesting things than we do the internal ones. So the user experience from the outside is about the same. And right now they have the same kind of, I guess, attack vectors. We're looking to do more enhancements that could actually, Vault could be, possibly more secure than what we're doing internally.
Another question. This one kind of on a different topic. Marcus Friedrich asked, we were talking earlier about enterprise environments. Do you have any recommendations of tools to use as a self-hosted Docker hub, Docker registry? Because obviously internally, public internet is often blocked or forbidden by security policies. Obviously, there's the Docker registry, But I don't know, Darren, do you want to just maybe talk about what you're seeing, what's the latest going on on-premise private registries, private Docker repos?
I mean, I don't think I have like particular insight on what's the best. They all kind of have their pros and cons. Um, you know, you can buy registry from Docker if you don't want to buy that from them. There's the open source one, which works perfectly fine, but does require a lot more investment in setting up, understanding how it works, and you don't get a lot of functionality that you would see like in Docker Hub, like sharing images, like saying you can access what. So the other ones that I've seen, there's Portis from SUSE. I've heard a lot of good things. A lot of people like that one. Then there's Artifactory. The one that I think is particularly interesting, to be honest, is the GitLab. Their integration. They have their own registry now built in, so you can actually run GitLab, which will give you a Git server. Plus they have CI. Some CI tools, and then the registry. But it's kind of, there's no clear, like, obvious, like, we're seeing everyone using this one thing. Everyone kind of picks the, the one that makes sense for the organization. They all have their kind of pros and cons. Shannon, do we actually have any, like, blog articles around that?
Yeah, we do. There's actually, if you go to our blog, there's one that kind of compares Artifactory and Nexus and the Docker registry and a bunch of things. I don't think it took a look at GitLab because I don't think that was out yet when it was written. But if you just do a search on rancher.com, you'll probably find a reasonably good, from late second half of last year article that we looked at and just kind of compared them. I would say generally the answer is if you already have a sort of something like Nexus or Artifactory, that tends to be what sticks. Most people just use what they've already got. And so, and all of these things support Docker now reasonably well. If you don't have something like that, I think the most popular thing is still just running your own registry. There's a pretty good catalog template within Rancher to just spin that up. So you can get started with that pretty quickly. But like Darren said, there's a bit of overhead. So there's also, I think, there's Quay.io has an on-premise version, I'm pretty sure. So there's quite a few things here. It's something we've been asked to do many, many times. People have said, why don't we just build a registry or something into the Rancher management server? It seems like there's lots of good answers already out there, and we've sort of feel like we've got a lot to do without doing that. So we've always kind of punted it down the road at least at some point, or suggested people partner, with someone else for that. Because there's quite a bit that goes into these things, and they're not dead simple. They tend to be, the better ones do offer a lot of security advantages, allow you to do some cool things from scanning and signing and other things. So it's a non-trivial thing. Definitely, Nexus Repository Manager is one. I think someone would just push that up there. Someone was saying they're using ProGet successfully on our side. I'm just gonna thank everyone and send these out to everybody so you can see what other people are saying. If you're using something and you want to tell the world, pop it in a question and I'll push it out there. One question that came up earlier and was about Docker 1.13 and testing, where we are on that. I just mentioned in the question that I know we'd started testing on it a little bit, but Darren, do you expect 1.13 support to come in 1.4, 1.5? What's your expectation on 1.13?
Yeah, I mean, just from it generally works. Like, it's kind of what we've seen with 1.4 is it either 100% works or 100% doesn't. Like, it just, it will just completely fail to come up, or it works fine. So we're going to kind of certify in QA Docker 1.13 with Rancher 1.5. There's no particular, like, basically the enhancements in 1.13 are mostly around swarm mode. So if you're not using swarm mode, there's not a lot kind of exciting there, except for the system purge. That one's pretty neat. They'll help you clean up images and unused volumes and containers and stuff.
Janitor-like stuff.
Yeah.
There was another question Luke asked, is auto-scaling planned into a release? That is, scale up a service based on CPU/memory usage. What's the latest on auto-scaling, Darren?
Right. So that was, basically kind of where we started with the webhooks that we were, just initially starting to release on 1.4 is it's actually the intention was to lay the groundwork for auto scaling, because what we're trying to do right now, so we have the scale up, scale down, and then we're trying to put together an integration with our load balancer such that we can look at network traffic and scale up and down based off of it. But we very much realize no matter what functionality we're going to build into Rancher itself of gathering metrics and scaling up and scaling down is a lot of people already have production monitoring systems or CloudWatch or something like that, and they're going to want to integrate with those. So the webhooks actually started as a way to do auto scaling. So we the next, hopefully the next feature that we're going to add besides scale up and down a service will be actually add and remove a host, so we can do auto scaling. And so maybe, I think next meetup we can show kind of the demos of how that integrates with an external system like Sysdig or Datadog, and then we can probably demo the work that we're doing internally right now, like hooking up our own load balancer. So auto scaling, to be honest, I think it's going to be it's ongoing work right now, and so it'll be kind of like piecemeal. The solution will get more and more complete over the next couple months.
All right. There was just one more question. Shang, are you still on there with and unmuted? Maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, there was just one more question that came in about Microsoft and containers, and it was kind of a broad question, a good one to sort of end on before we go through the last few things. But it was a question Jason asked about, how committed do you think Microsoft is in general to containers? Do they see making private cloud, multi-cloud containers easier as a threat to Azure? Is it more of a Me Too play at this point, or do you think it's more of a really serious, long-term, sustainable drive that they have to really transform how Windows applications are built? What's your take on it from what you've seen?
From what I've seen is just the way, not containers specifically, but just see how Microsoft does business is they generally launch capabilities very, very carefully after, a lot of thought. What is it that they want to support, especially something as fundamental as, virtualization or containers. But once they built it into the operating system, I mean, literally, I think you can expect them to, support this stuff for decades. So I think they've clearly made the decision to make containers a core capability of both, the Windows Server operating system and even Windows Desktop operating system. So I just have no reason to doubt Microsoft's commitment. It's definitely something all of Microsoft's customers can rely on, just like every other feature Microsoft has released, in the last 30 years. They're generally very good with support, very good with backward compatibility. What's probably still not less clear is maybe as you kind of move up the stack, whether at some point, whether I always wonder whether System Center will provide a lot more powerful native container management capabilities, but I would certainly expect those things to come as well. All
right. Thank you all for joining today. We had a huge crowd, and I think I tweeted this out. There's more than 1,500 people registered for this meetup. So every month it seems like there's more. If you haven't already, download Rancher OS. They're in GitHub. Get involved. Post your issues. Contribute. There's more and more easy ways to contribute. So much of Rancher is just little microservices and areas where, if you want a feature and you think something would really make it better, it's open source. We actually, as much as we had so many thousands and thousands of users, we don't get a lot of people contributing to Rancher. It's mostly built by our team, and we get tons of issues and we get lots of people helping on things like docs, but we really do welcome more people getting involved from a developer perspective. So if you're interested in that and you have ideas on how we might be able to help you get more engaged, please let us know. We're certainly planning to do a lot more outreach there. Couple things that are kind of cool. If you haven't seen it already, this last month we sort of quietly rolled out something called try.rancher.com. It is it's a really easy way to get started with Rancher. It's free to anyone, and it is allows you to just get a free Rancher management plane using the very latest versions of Rancher. So 1.3.3 is the current version. You can go to try.rancher.com. Sign up with GitHub. You just have to provide a little bit of information, and then the management frame will be taken care of for you. You can use it. It's not meant for production. This is not a this is not like a managed service that we're backing everything up continuously. It's really meant to try and use it as your sandbox, use it as your lab, use it as your personal playground. You need to bring your own infrastructure. Obviously, we're just sort of providing the management framework here, but you can come in, bring as always with Rancher, just add your host from wherever it makes sense, local, cloud, whatever, and start playing. We sort of quietly released it a couple weeks ago and just started telling people about it in the last few weeks, and already there are, I think, over 500 or 1,000 accounts that have been created. So we're one of the cool things about it is it's allowing us to really bang hard on the scaling of the management server. So we're kind of excited to do this. We're doing isolated private environments for each user as they sign up. You can create multiple environments. So it's a really cool place to use Rancher if you're not already using it. You just need a GitHub ID to get started. Then if you need more help, join a free training class. If you haven't already taken it, we run free trainings every. I think it's the second Thursday of the month every month. They're getting started guides. They're not really meant for people who are already using Rancher heavily, but if you just want to get the latest and see the latest version, maybe there's a new feature that you're not sure about. They're human driven. They're not online classes. We have people to give them. There's usually 1 or 2 people on there, so they'll also answer your questions if you're stuck, if something's not quite making sense. It's a great way to just get in and talk. The other thing I mentioned earlier was the new slack.rancher.io. Again, another thing we sort of quietly have rolled out in the last few weeks. We'll be sort of sending it out and making a bigger deal out of it. But if you haven't already, sign up there. We all spend time in there. It's another great way, in addition to the forums, in addition to GitHub, to maybe get a little more real-time help. I feel like we've always had a huge popular IRC channel, but Slack is how we talk to each other. So it's a little more integrated into all of the engineers that work on Rancher, and so I think it's a great way to just kind of get involved and get engaged if you're interested in contributing, if you have a question, if you're not sure what's working, what's not working. It's certainly no shortage of people that are out there also in the community answering questions and helping. There's so many amazing people that kind of populate the forums and help other people get started with Rancher. So I can't tell you how much we appreciate their work and their time. Okay, thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Shen and James, for joining us this month and diving into Windows containers. Darren, as always, thanks for joining and helping us dig into the latest and greatest in Rancher. And everyone who comes, please let us know if you'd like to present, if you'd like to share something. We're always eager to have more people talking and presenting on these things. But thanks again. We will see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.